Welcome to the Mentor Public Library's program, Your Town. Our topic this evening is building a Frank Lloyd Wright house, and I'm Pat Moreland, your host, and our guest is Louis Penfield, who is the builder of a Frank Lloyd Wright home. And thank you for being our guest.
My pleasure.
Mr. Penfield is in himself a very accomplished artist in many areas. In fact, he describes himself as a three artist, which he identifies as a painter, a writer, and a photographer, but yet he has many more abilities.
That's right. Actually, that title came about in almost in another way. At one time, when my children were very young, I built a little tiny studio in back of an old farmhouse where my wife and I were living, and I thought, I gotta have a title for this place. So I said, let's name it Three Artists. I'm an artist, my young daughter's an artist, my son's an artist. You know, here they are, what, about that tall. So that was the title of it. And when it came, I had to eventually have something separate as a bank account. And I thought, I'll call this Three Artists. And that's what I did.
Well, it has many meanings to you then.
Right. It's sort of a whole combination of things. Yeah.
Now, you became enamored with Frank Lloyd Wright years before your actual association with him. And you have an interesting story to tell how your interest in his and knowledge of him came to be.
Well, in a sense, it's like I became aware of him down at Ohio State University, not through a study of art history, because our art history teacher was a gentleman who loved Greek art. Everything was Greek art, you know. And modern American concepts in painting, sculpture, and architecture, he touched on. He even ran over Van Gogh in a total of 5 minutes with a few slides, and Cézanne and all these people that I greatly admired. But one day, in Hoyt Sherman's life class, Mr. Sherman is up by the model, getting ready to pose the model. A girl comes in with this book about this size, and it has on it, on the back, she reads it, Mr. Sherman, how did you get Mr. Wright to endorse this book? Here's on the back there, you know how they have on book jackets, I believe you are on the right track in the work that you are doing, Frank Lloyd Wright, in great big letters. The girl said, Mr. Sherman, how did you get Mr. Wright to endorse this? And he explained, he said, well, Eugene Masselink, who is now Frank Lloyd Wright's secretary, was in my art classes. In fact, he was an art major all the way through college with me. So I had this book ready to go to press. I sent out a letter and closed the manuscript. Said, Gene, would you show this to Mr. Wright and see if he will comment on it? Which he did. And of course, Wright rambled along in this letter. And Sherman picked out that one comment. I believe you are on the right track in the work you're doing. And the girl said, well, what did Mr. Wright do? What is his work like? And Sherman explained it. He said, he didn't have doors all through the house. He left what we normally would say in a room would have a door. This space was open. So it had a flowing sense to it. You know, I'm sitting there in class. What? No doors? I mean, how do you get away with that kind of thing? You know, I thought this is strange. For some reason or other, many, many years later, I remembered Sherman talking about Gene Masselink. And I was teaching out in Missouri, the small college called Central College, now Central Methodist College. And I suppose in a way you could say I got the job there because I was Methodist and I applied for it. It's a wonderful place to teach, you know. Not too exciting, but the kids were great. Well, anyhow, I was not what I felt was being a good architectural teacher. So when I went back to Ohio in the summertime, I went down and called on Sherman. I said, Hoyt, you know, my wife walked into the room one day out in Missouri. She said, Lou, you promised to build me a house. And I'm sitting there, I did? Did I do that before we were married? Well, anyhow, that resolved in my saying, I don't want to come back to Ohio. You know, I saw an angle. You know, unlike husbands, I saw an angle. I'll come back to Ohio only if I have a year to paint. I've been teaching out in Missouri, not doing too much painting, which is the way it happened. I said also, we should have a nature house. I don't know what a nature house was. But anyhow, one time when I was out in Missouri, before all this coming back home happened, we were asked to have a class where we would teach people in town free. It was a promotion thing. And this was like all the chairmen of departments. I was chairman of art since I was the only teacher. So I had 12 ladies from the town. A man would not get caught dead in a painting room, you know, in Missouri, not art as such. One of them was married to the town millionaire, and she became very interested in painting, invited us out to her home, and we became friends. One time, I happened to be in the house alone, and the phone rang. I answered it, and this person was Liz Stapleton on the phone. She said, there's an interesting movie in town tonight. Now, this is a center, small town in Missouri. You got westerns all week long. Sunday would be something a little different. She said, there's a show. I said, yeah, I saw the marquee. I said, it's about an architect. Hollywood messes up the lives of architects and artists. I said, I don't want to see it. She said, well, John, I'd like you and your wife to go. Pauline would love going. I said, that's the way I feel. I won't go. I'll get in there and I'll start shouting, you know. I've seen so many movies they've done on artists. So anyhow, she comes over. This is the key, and that's why I'm expanding on this one incident. She comes up, bangs on the door. She's a tall, skinny, attractive woman. I open it, she shoves this book right into my stomach like that. She said, if you believe in what you're teaching, you will not be able to put this book down. You know, what kind of a challenge is that? You know, I picked up the book, and it's based on this man right here, Frank Lloyd Wright. But it's a takeoff of his life. But many of the architectural ideas were in there, and I started to read that book, and she was right. I could not put it down. She said, if you really believe in what you're teaching, you won't be able to put this book down. I opened it up, and I couldn't. It took a week or so to read it. It's a big, thick book. But it's based on Wright's life. And I thought, that's what I've been looking for. I know it's Frank Lloyd Wright. My wife wants to get out of Missouri, go home and build. That's a clue for me. But I don't think he'll design anything. You know, what do we have? Just a little bit of money. We had a lot of land. It's my wife's ancestors' land. But how should we approach that? I said, let's go out there and have one of his students do it, you know. So we wrote a letter to Eugene Masselink, and we went out, walk in the place. Gene is showing us this book, and it's Wright stuff. You know, I'm not going to say, hey, you know, don't show us Mr. Wright stuff. He pointed to one page a home built for $15,000. I said, well, Gene, you know, we can afford something that costs around $10,000, you know. At that moment, so help me. In he walks. How was he dressed? Beret, flowing cape, a cane. To me, it was like God had walked through the door, you know. I stood paralyzed, you know. He said, Gene, gotta go into Madison, Wisconsin. Hurry, let's go. You know, he walks over and he stands there. I look at him and I say, Mr. Wright, would you be interested in designing a house? You know, I was standing up there, you know, I stretch out a little bit. I've heard everything is low in this house. Would you be interested in designing a house for someone as tall as I am?
Which is 6'8".
6'8", you know. He didn't say anything. He had his cane. He pointed to this pillar, whatever you want to call it over there, ceiling area. He said, stand under that. That's 6 feet 8 inches tall. And I went over and I stood. I looked at him. He looked at me. Gene came in. He said, Gene, let's go. I catch up with Gene. Gene's a little bit embarrassed, you know. What, he's talking to a client here, you know, and the old man comes in and out. He said, go home, draw a map, the land where you want to build, locate the trees, contours of the land, send it out to us. That's what we did. Mailed it out. 1 year goes by. I don't hear anything.
I'm going to interrupt you for a moment.
Yeah.
Because we have to take a break, but we'll be back in just a second. Welcome back to the Manor Public Library's program, Your Town. Our topic this evening is building a Frank Lloyd Wright house, and our guest is Louis Penfield, who is the builder of a Frank Lloyd Wright home here in Lake County. And Mr. Wright also designed a second home, which we're going to be talking about for Mr. Penfield. But the first part of the program, Mr. Penfield explained to us how he even became acquainted and associated with Frank Lloyd Wright, which to most people is just something that seems unbelievable. And I think you were even awed by the fact that you were able to actually have him design your home, which you were not expecting.
That's right. All I felt was if we get a student to do it, and Gene just started showing me Frank Lloyd Wright stuff like that. And the old man walked in. Off they went. My wife and I and the kids moved back to Ohio on her ancestors' land, which is 30 acres at the time. And I started wandering around. Well, I didn't have to wander around the place. I used to go down there swimming as a kid, as a child, from up in Willoughby. Chagrin River land, bottom land down there, cornfields in there, rich soil coming up with a slope to a higher land, never flooded up there. So that allows you a place
for the home.
For the home. So I drew the maps, sent them out. Didn't hear anything for a year. Went out. Had another interview with Mr. Wright, you know, reminded him, you know, don't forget, Mr. Wright, when I stretch, I don't want my hands going up through the ceiling. Don't worry. Don't worry about a thing. I'll design a device for you when you step into my low-slung house, turn you sideways, take you around. He goes into a series of ideas on how he was going to help me as a tall person. All of a sudden, he stood up, said, don't worry. That was the end of the interview. I knew. Don't worry. A person should have their home fit their needs and desires. I mention that because you hear all these stories that he couldn't care less about the clients, and he cuts loose and does this, that, and the other. Clients don't even know about it. That's his philosophy, and that's what he did. He sent the plans, you know, he said, we'll have preliminary sent to you in January. Okay those, look them over, or do whatever. Mail them out. We'll have it designed for you by spring, so you can start the spring of that year.
And he did?
Yeah. The trouble was I couldn't get a job in Willoughby. I ended up teaching down in Ashland, Ohio. Best thing that ever happened to me. I loved it down there. Kids were great. Well, when we got the plans, the working drawings, you know, I finally got a job at Mayfield, and I'd like to show you some of the things relative to the school. A young lady there was a student of mine. That's an exhibit we had on Frank Lloyd Wright. What you see here and here are the architectural preliminary drawings that were sent to the client. I also have some pictures of Mr. Wright's.
I'll take this down.
Yeah, let's get rid of that.
I'll take it.
Mr. Wright's. This again is the preliminary without the color. This is not the, it's a literal copy of his concept drawing, which he does first. You never see that. I had this exhibit. They were willing to run off a blueprint from the original and send it here. So that's the floor plan. There's your elevation. And over here, right at the edge, is the other view. So the student there, his helper or the assistant, in this case, Davy Davidson, went and worked from this and did this. What did I do? This is the second house. I have pictures here of the first house somewhere. This was after the freeway was being built, and we went out to talk to Mr. Wright about doing a different home, which would this time be done in Chagrin Riverstone. Well, I had to learn how to build with stone, so I built a studio in the woods that I designed, which I felt, I tried to make that design very similar to Mr. Wright's work. And let's go from there. This, again, is a copy, exact size now, from the second idea designed by Mr. Wright. I had, in the meantime, as I talked about, had built the first house, which is a very simple concrete block house. This was an enlarged shot of my studio. I tried to learn to lay up the stone, and my emphasis is on really more of the second home now than it is the first. My son owns Frank Lloyd Wright House number 1. He's at present restoring it. It's built of concrete block and glass, and I have a picture of it here somewhere.
Right
oh,
there,
yeah, here it is. This is a picture showing the home during an autumn snowstorm, and I thought it was so beautiful, like the snowflakes were that big. So I got out there with my camera and took this picture of it.
Now, you built this home.
I had it built.
You had it built, but you assisted.
I helped a little bit. I hauled the block up, and 2 masons put it up in place. Really, I helped on the interior when we ran out of money. You know, that happens. You say, well, what did a home like this cost, roughly? Well, roughly it cost $20,000 plus. And when we ran out of money, we moved in. As time went on, gradually, I had to be the carpenter to do some of the finish work. And I'll tell you, that was difficult to do, but it was wonderful to try.
Now, one of the things in reading about Frank Lloyd Wright is that he designed the home so that the outside could come in. So you could view the outside, but the outside didn't look in. You were the one, the occupant of the resident, you enamored, or you were able to grab in the outside and bring it in and bring in what you wanted. And there was a central area that, even though his areas were open and flowing, it was practically designed because there was like a central core for the plumbing and the heating in this situation. So he had practicality in his design besides trying to accomplish something and speaking of expanding nature and such.
Right. In other words, there was a lot of glass. The glass faced the river bluffs where the Chagrin River flowed around through there, both to the north and to the east. In other words, the house was located so that you could look out there and see that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then the freeway came along, and I watched step by step they cut down all the trees and desecrated the whole 7 acres that they bought. We even sued them because we felt we couldn't stop them from being built.
Mm-hmm.
But we ended up suing the state of Ohio because we felt the price was not high enough for the amount of land they took. And that's a whole adventure in itself. I don't even want to talk about that.
Now, the reason that you designed or have the designs for a second house is because of that happening. You felt that took away from the home, so you wanted to design a second home that captured the land that was remained and unoccupied.
Actually, at first we thought, we opened up the local paper and there was this map. I looked at it and I said, Pauline, you know, that's going right to our living room. We thought it was going right through there.
That'd be quite a shock.
So, zoom, we went out to see Mr. Wright, you know, and he looked at it and he said, well, go get some more land that's similar and use the same idea. But I'm not designing houses anymore. I have a lot of big projects, and I'll be doing those the rest of my life. But since you're already under the wire, you have a house. If you want, I will design you the second house. You know, there I am, $20,000 in debt. I'm a school teacher, you know. People may think I'm rich, but I'm not. I said, Mr. Wright, I don't want to build the same thing. I'll tell you right now, I want you to design a new one. He said, all right, when you're ready, send out the map. Well, time goes on. I know he'll live forever. I'm not too sure. I will. So I sent out the map, you know, where it should be. And I go to school one day, you know, walk into my homeroom. Kids are there all working, you know, they kind of glance at me. They don't say anything. I say, all right, I'm their homeroom teacher. What's wrong? Something's happened. You're here studying, you know? Tell me. A girl stands up. Mr. Penfield, did you watch television this morning? I said, I never watch it in the morning. She hesitates. She said, last night, Frank Lloyd Wright was operated on, and he died. I thought, there goes the whole idea, you know. We all thought he'd live forever, you know. Well, indirectly he has. So, 3 weeks later, in comes the mailman. I see him get out, you know, he's got this big orange tube. The old man designed it.
What
that was it. Do I have any more, or is that
no,
it?
That's
it. But anyhow, all these years have gone by, and no money, you know. I'm like everybody else. Hell, I'm in debt. You know, you pay off your debts, you're free of debt. Something happens, right back down again. Now I want to sell the land, providing the house is built. Step number one. They don't want to build that house, they don't get that land. Some people have been interested, even a former student of mine. A couple of boys down in Stowe, Ohio, they're great architects, good boys. They feel it could make a good project. Young lady in Cleveland is interested. She and her friends, they would like to build it. Former student of mine wants to build it. He's vice president in small industry. I know him. He can build anything. Great faith in him. He's a wild character. So it takes somebody like him, you know, to do it.
That would be interested.
Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time, but hopefully, although we've run out of time, you won't run out of time to get your, which I think is a dream for you, to see this second project completed.
I want to dream about it, see it built, walk away from it and be a bum, just travel the rest of my life and paint. I'm a painter and a teacher.
Yes, you are.
I'm not a builder.
Well, I'd like to thank you, though, for sharing with us your experience with Frank Lloyd Wright. And I know that you have a continuation even in, you're going to be on November 9th speaking to the Ohio Art Education Association about being in the client's eye of Frank Lloyd Wright. And thank you for sharing with us who live with you here locally with your experience with him.
Yeah. My pleasure to be here.
And thank you. And thank you for watching the Mentor Public Library's program, Your Town.